welcome to Spirit Switchboard. I'm your host, Carrie Lynn Shellhorn, and you are listening to us live on the United Public Radio Network and the UFO Paranormal Radio Network, 105.3 in the Gulf Coast and 107.7 FM in New Orleans. If you are interested in finding out more about what UPRN has to offer, you can head to uprntalkradio.com. You can find out more about the hosts, the shows. There's always something new happening, and it is not all high strangeness and paranormal. There is something for everyone. How's everybody doing? You know that we're moving out of, I don't talk about astrology very much, but I was paying attention this month. And again, I say it all the time, my friend Joni. So my friend Joni that does forensic astrology, she's got True Crime Mysteries Beyond the Veil, which is it's super fun, especially if you are a true crime person. She was blasting all over about how it was like Aries, and it was fiery. I found myself over the last month kind of fiery, a little more than normal, and it wasn't all like lack of sleep or hormones. There was something a little extra that was going on. So I'm glad that we feel like we're moving out of it, but I'd love to hear from you guys what your thoughts were and how you've been managing this last month. Hi, Julie. You know what, Julie, you remember when we were talking about astrology and I was talking about Geminis? You're now my favorite Gemini. And so every time I say hi to you each week in my head, because Squirrel on Red Bull and all of the good things, I go, hi, Julie Dow, my favorite Gemini in my head. Hi, Joanna and Ella. Thanks for being here. Folks, I want to know, I was so excited. Originally, when I got onto this book, how it came across for me was an article by Brian Baker, who we've had on the show. And Brian was part of the Lake Superior Paracon last year. We were both speakers at the Paracon in Thunder Bay. He did an article about this book, A Ghost in the Room, Supernatural Adventures in Historical Houses. So Ann McDougall, if you've been listening to the show or following along for a while, you know how much I talk about the Ireland House in Ancaster, Ontario, and how much I love it. Historical homes, any of those sort of places, I've always been drawn to, and it's really the history first. But I have also taught in so many different places, from Sault Ste. Marie and Napanee within Ontario, in historical homes that have a haunted history. So I'm not saying that they're all actually haunted, but there is haunted folklore or haunted stories attached to them. And it adds to it. When you are teaching intuitive development in those homes, there's just something extra about it, whether it is the history to it, if there's the stories. And that was the thing that was hooked me. That was what hooked me too, because, you know, how often do they get asked, the people that work at museums, to got a haunted story? It was the first thing that I asked, and not even the guide when we did the Kingston Penitentiary tour. It was the old guys that were retired correctional officers that were kind of standing around. And I was like, got anything on your phone for photos? Like, is there a secret, storyline that's not government approved that you're allowed to share? Because I would love to know. And they all did. And I don't know, there's so many takes to this sort of thing, right? Are they really haunted? And theories and putting it to the test. So, A Ghost in the Room, Ann McDougall, Supernatural Adventures in Historic Houses. The way that Ann has wrote this with, it's that high intention, low attachment phrase you guys have heard me say a lot. High intention, low attachment, going in open-minded and open-hearted. And I recognize, in working full-time as a medium, it's about hope. We don't want to have expectation, but I know everybody that comes out to events or has a session has hope. And I don't know, you could kind of feel that thread of hope through this. And it's written with such grace and humility and humor. I just love it, folks. I really hope you all get it. And then if you get it, then maybe we need to do a part 2 and we can all chat about it like a book club. I can't even believe I said that out loud, book club, because I've never been part of one. This is the first book that's encouraged me. That and yeah, I think that's great. So let me read Ann's. We'll just do it real quick. All folks, it's so good to see you all. I'm glad that you're going to be part of the chat today. Heidi Goal, Jody Schott, Carrie Fast, thank you so much. Cindy Waghorn, I thought you would be interested in this one as well too. Happy Friday. It's nice to see you too. I'm very excited for this episode as well. Sorry, folks, we went sideways. I promise. This is why I write down all the questions so I don't completely forget everything. So, folks, tonight we're welcoming Ann McDougall, author of A Ghost in the Room, Supernatural Adventures in Historic Houses. Ann brings a fascinating perspective to the paranormal conversation because she comes not just from a world of ghost stories, but from years spent inside historic house museums, those intimate spaces where history, memory, and atmosphere and mystery seem to press up against one another. Please welcome to the show, Ann.
Hello.
Thank you so much for agreeing to come on.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, and hello to everybody in the chat. It's great to be here.
Hello, Jen. Haunted historic homes. I'm going to drag you out to one yet. Cheryl Smith, hi. Thank you so much for being here. Kiara J, thank you so much for being here. Heidi saying good day, Ann. Much love from Boulder.
Oh, hello.
I know that. Is it okay if I ask, or that we talk? I asked you a personal question and asked if it was okay if we talk about it. Is it okay for me? So,
yes.
At the very end of the book, I mean, you share part of your personal journey as well too. Near the back, there's a chapter about that.
Yeah.
And then when you're doing your thank yous at the end, all of the list of people that supported you and helped you through in the acknowledgements, there was a huge thank you to Kate McDougall. So I had asked if that was your sister, and I loved it because you write, who did any and every weird thing I could throw at her. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I just think I adore you even more because, you know, that's the relationship that I have with my sister. So I have, you know, I'm older than her. I'm the older one. And when we were little, I would read Stephen King to her. And I'm significantly older than her. So, you know, she said that I'm the one that caused her to have, you know, nightmares and therapy. But she still has allowed me to bring her to factories to do paranormal investigations, to the historic homes, and to, you know, any of the crazy things, down to coming on the podcast to talk about our, you know, what cryptid we want in our backyard if we were going to have one and living in our backyard, right? And she just always says yes. And I just love that in this journey, because even the take that you had from looking from a scientific lens, there's the human aspect to it where it can be very vulnerable and raw, that you had your sister along for that sort of grounding force, right?
It was really special to me too. So my sister she's the older sister. She was the one reading Stephen King when we were kids. But she, you know, I was lucky. I had a lot of support in the process of writing this book, both my family and my friends, and also a lot of museum professionals that I spoke to around the country. But I really noted my sister in the thank yous at the end because she was the one who would come out to anything, any paranormal investigation, any demonstration of mediumship, any old building. She was there. She was game. And, you know, there's that kind of open-heartedness to questions that I think really is important in a process like this when you're dealing with something that is both scientific but also sensitive and human and part of our culture. And so having that support from her and really across the board in the people in my life really helped me to, this is my first book, and it really kind of helped me through that process. It was amazing.
Well, you didn't lean either way. You are just sharing very openly. This was my experience. This was, the train of thought that I had and the rabbit hole that I went down. And here's all the different ways that I approached this.
Yeah.
And you just give it to us. You don't push us either way, and you don't try to deter anyone from not believing at the same time. This was my experience, and we get to go on this ride with you through this book. And I appreciate that very much.
Thank you. That was important to me. Like, for me personally, I'm more science-minded. Like, I am very kind of interested in the science and the reasons behind why we believe what we believe. But I really take issue with people, often if you're coming from a science sort of focus, people will bring a lot of skepticism. There's nothing wrong with skepticism. We should all ask for evidence and proof. But sometimes when people approach a subject like this with skepticism, it can be dismissive, and they'll be dismissive of the idea of the paranormal and dismissive of the experiences that people have. And I think that if you are dismissive of what people are experiencing, then you're missing the most interesting aspect of this. The fact is, people have these experiences. We don't have a full understanding of why. And if people are having experiences with ghosts, experiences with the supernatural, no matter what the scientific explanation is, it is a very interesting question to say, why? Why is this happening? What's happening in the world? What's happening in our brains? And you can't get there if you are dismissive or locked into your own beliefs. You can only get there through curiosity. So I'm really glad to hear you say that, because that is the approach I really wanted to take. And also I found it's the approach that worked best for me as I kind of went through this process of learning and investigation.
Wow. And you did it all. Like, and I wrote it for automatic writing, seances, Ouija board, like spiritualist church, sitting in a large group event with a well-known medium. Like you just went from one thing after another, and all of it, where it was just a check mark. And I loved that you were open-minded to all of it, even the list of places, right, that you went to. So I guess where I would like to start is you had the idea. How did you break down how you would begin the process of it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So before I wrote A Ghost in the Room, I had written an essay a few years earlier, just talking about my work experience, which was that I worked in historic house museums. And I'm sure everyone's familiar with the kind of museum I mean. It's the kind where it's like an old house and it has the original occupant's stuff. And then there's someone there, often in a costume from the period, who gives you a tour. And that was me. And I worked in those houses for years. I loved them. And every day people would come in and they would ask me, is the house haunted? And often the genuine answer I would give was no, at least not in my experience. Like, I wasn't someone who was having a lot of paranormal experiences, but I found out pretty quickly that it didn't matter, because people wanted to know, but they also wanted to tell me their experiences and their ghost stories. And I thought that was so interesting. Like, why are all these questions in people, and why do they come out of museums? So I'd written an essay just about my own experiences in the houses. And then I was really sort of fortunate to start talking to a publisher about maybe turning it into a book. And I think early on, whenever I told people I was writing a book about ghosts, they expected me to write a book of ghost stories. Now, don't get me wrong, I love a book of ghost stories. They are fun, but there are already a lot of them. And I really wanted to answer that sort of question for myself of, why is this so interesting to people? Why do people keep asking? And so my goal was kind of to dig into, why do humans want to be haunted? Because, in my experience, I found that people really not only weren't really afraid of ghosts, they really, really wanted to experience them. And that was true historically, and it was true in modern times. So I sort of broke it into two pieces. One was to look at the history, some of it going back thousands of years, of how we've engaged with ghosts, how they're part of our culture, right up through the 19th century and the rise of spiritualism and seances. And then I also wanted to look at what do people do today? Because it's not like seances have gone away. It's not like mediums have gone away. This is
Nope.
a huge part of our culture. And in fact, whenever I found a topic that I wanted to write about, whether it was something like spirit photography or whether it was what happens in a seance, whenever I found a topic, I always thought, oh, will I have enough to write a full chapter? And then every single time I found way more than I needed. There was so much history and so much happening in the world. And so I realized very quickly, this is something that touches every community. Every community has either an occult style shop or a spiritualist church or a paranormal investigation group or multiples of all of those things. This is actually
ghost walks.
Yeah, every community in Canada of any size has some kind of ghost walk at some point in the year. This is something that's really deeply woven into our lives. And I think that's what makes it so interesting to me as a history person, as someone who loves culture, as someone who loves the human mind. Like, why are ghosts so important to us?
And in your research, did you find that maybe the meaning or the pull shifted, or the reason why they're so interested shifted, whether it was religious or cultural, or like when we talk about the birth of spiritualism, it was the Civil War, millions of people had passed, children that passed because of illness, like there was that want for connection.
Yeah.
So would that themes stay consistent, but are other themes, do you know what I mean? I'm asking not very gracefully.
No, I do know what you mean. I felt like when I started my research, I thought, well, for one thing, I thought people were scared of ghosts. And I've found again and again, they're really not. We're scared of horror movies and we love spooky stories. Those scare us. But for the most part, people are just purely fascinated. And everybody I spoke to, they sometimes had fear around like Ouija boards or specific things. But for the most part, people just want to engage with ghosts. They want to know. And I found that curiosity runs through the history very strongly, is that curiosity is probably the biggest thing that brings people to these discussions, I think. And of course, it's very natural, right? When we talk about ghosts, what we're really asking about is what happens at the end of life? What happens to the people that we love? What happens? Is there a part of us that continues? Is there not? What does that mean? These are big, deep questions. And I think actually, I really have come to believe that ghosts give us a way, whether supernatural or not, they give us a way to engage with these deep questions about life and death. And that's incredibly important to us. And so that's the thing that I saw again and again is grief was often part of it. Often it was tied to what was happening politically, but politics shift and culture shifts. But this deep curiosity about death never really goes away.
It really doesn't. What are they doing on the other side? Will they be there for us? Are they still there for us? Like all those questions stay the same.
Absolutely.
In all of those places. I am. So that answers that part. Then the locations that you chose, had you already been to some of those places prior to researching, or how did you?
For the most part, my research took me to a bunch of really interesting museums. Now, I love historic house museums. I always try to check them out. But there were a lot that I wasn't aware of that I kind of found through this research. So, for example, I went to a wonderful historic house called Fulford Place in Brockville, which is this, I highly recommend, by the way, if anyone's in Brockville or passing through, because it is this gorgeous mansion from the late 19th through the early 20th century, all its original furnishings, absolutely beautiful. It's like 20,000 square feet, surrounded by these incredible gardens that were designed by the Olmsted brothers, who also designed Central Park in New York, like just this gem of a historic site. But one of the pieces of their history is that William Lyon Mackenzie King, who was the Prime Minister of Canada, actually Canada's longest serving Prime Minister, he attended his first seance there and became incredibly interested in seances. They became a really big part of his life. He was a huge believer in the supernatural. He was a huge believer in spirit communication. And it's this sort of fascinating piece of history because this was a tremendously powerful man who had this experience. And this happened while he was prime minister. This was not later in life. This was while he was at the peak of his power. And you can go there, and not only can you visit this incredible historic house, you can walk right into the space where he had that experience, this beautiful drawing room off the bedroom of one of the house's inhabitants, lined with mirrors. I mean, you're talking about scrying in mirrors early, and I thought that was so interesting. And it's this extraordinary chance to really step into this history and to get a sense of what was happening. And so that's just one example. I went to a lot of museums that had this kind of connection to the history of spirit communication. And it really made me feel in a really tangible way how woven into our history it is and how it's very much sort of still present around us. It was really interesting.
Yeah. Well, and on your list was the Homer Watson house as well too, and they hosted many seances, and they were, do you want to share a little bit about that?
Yeah,
I did an event there last year, actually.
Oh, as a part of their spirit season. Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
So that's another house I'd never been to. So Homer Watson House and Gardens, just outside of Kitchener, was the home of a landscape painter from the 19th century, Homer Watson, who his work is stunningly beautiful. He really was an incredible painter, but he was also a devout spiritualist sort of later in his life. And so his whole house now is both a museum and an art school. Beautiful, beautiful place. But his story is so interesting to me. I actually find it incredibly romantic. So he had this wife named Roxa, and they were just an incredible team. She managed his career. She was, by all accounts, incredibly intelligent and vivacious. And he was this sort of wonderfully talented but scattered artist. So they were just this incredible team. And she died, and he fell into this deep, deep depression. And during this depression, he had trouble working, and he was really, really suffering. And then the story that is very clearly recorded is one day he was sitting in his studio, despairing. And then all of a sudden on the central staircase of the house, he sees this glowing light, and he sees Roxa, spirit, in the light. And she smiles at him, and she says, "Do not despair. All is well, Homer." And then she disappears. And it's a transformative experience for him. It lifts him out of his grief, gives him a new lease on life. He's able to paint again, and he becomes fascinated with the supernatural and the occult, and he starts to have seances and attend seances. And that's a great example of a really real piece of history. This really happened to a prominent Canadian figure. And because the house is there and because it is a museum, they're able to tell that story, and you're able to go into a studio and you're able to go onto the staircase and see where it happened. And so it's just such a rich, beautiful piece of history. And to me, it's also such a great example of how history and the supernatural really intersect. They're not separate from one another. They really are one and the same often.
That's right. And I found I was part of their raising funds, right, to keep things going. And I did table tipping with everyone in that one room, which was super fun. But what I found is everyone really did want to hear the history to the house and feel the space and connect, not just to the ghost story, but to the romantic side of it. And I think that we can romanticize some of these stories. I found at Homer Watson House, I tapped into his sister more because his sister was equally as creative, and then she managed him after.
Yes,
so
Watson, yeah.
I found she came through the loudest from her perspective. And so I feel like from your perspective in the job that you had, we can bring their story to life. Me from the way that I work and the way that you work, we can bring their stories forward, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I found time and again that people would show up at museums wanting the supernatural, wanting the ghost side of the experience, and then get drawn into the history. And for me, as a person who loves history, I love to see it. I think that's such a wonderful way for people to step into a subject that can otherwise, people can be intimidated with museums, or they can be afraid that it'll be boring. And of course it isn't, because it's all about these human stories. But very often the supernatural is a way for people to step inside. And I think it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. And it's the opening of the door for the teachable moment,
Yeah, exactly.
Carrie is chiming in from Calgary. So romanticizing is a good word to describe paranormal experiences. Well, and definitely with these stories, like even Ireland House, the Ireland family built the house in the late 1800s, and the last living Ireland family member died in 1987 or
Wow.
86, and then the house was given to the city in 87. So that whole time period, everything that's in it. So just their story of farming and first wife dying, second wife coming over, and all of the children and their stories. Like we romanticize that,
Definitely.
It's like the Outlander for all of us.
It's true. I agree. I think romanticizing is a good word. Like whenever we study history, we want to be as accurate as we can. But the truth is, these are human stories. And human beings, like, we connect with the human side of it. We connect with the storytelling side of it. And there's nothing wrong with that. That is how we engage. That's how we learn. That's how we make meaning out of this very complex world. So I'm firmly in favor of romanticizing. I think it's actually a really good lens on the past.
Yeah. And coming from that place of loss, the presidents that had seances in the White House all started from a sense of loss, right? And I don't know. I just think that we all want to have that connection, with somebody that gets it or understands, or to the other side as well too.
Yeah.
So, please go ahead.
I was going to say, I think that the White House, whether White House seances, whether you're talking about Abraham Lincoln's wife, Mary Todd Lincoln, or whether you're talking about Calvin Coolidge a little bit later on, there is, some suggestion that this kind of thing was happening. And we know, of course, in Canada, the Prime Minister in the 1930s was doing seances. And there's quite a bit of evidence that suggests that really powerful people, both here in North America and in Europe, we know heads of state, kings, queens, were attending seances, as well as ordinary people. This was also happening at a very everyday working class level of society. And to me, that really speaks about what a human experience this is. Like, it transcends class boundaries. The truth is, everybody wants to know about the other side. Everybody has these questions. It's very equalizing in a way. Like, you see it in halls of power, and you see it in tiny family homes where people are struggling. And I find that fascinating.
Yeah. That whole birth of spiritualism, I love talking about that as well. Yeah. Right? Because it was those lower middle class people that were working as that, finding a way to earn an income, really, is what they were.
Yes. And, particularly women. Like, one of the things I find interesting about spiritualism sort of emerging so quickly in the 1850s, like, that's, we talk about going viral a lot now. And I think one thing I found in my research is that once the idea of spirit communication kind of came on the scene in 1848, it was like popular across North America within a year. Like, it was so fast to catch on. And then seances become this huge part of the entire second half of the 19th century and the early 20th century and even the mid 20th century. And it happened so fast. And I think one of the reasons for that is that seances, and spiritualism particularly, were from the beginning an activity that was centered around women. And of course, there are male spiritualists, there are male mediums, there always have been. But the Fox sisters, who sort of started the movement, were very young women. They were teenagers. And a lot of prominent figures in the early movement were women. And what you see a lot of, especially in these early years, are female trance speakers. So women who will give lectures, that they are channeling a spirit through themselves. And suddenly they're in these public spaces and they're giving lectures on topics like science and politics and religion. which is just something that really wasn't available to women before. And so it's really interesting that this connection with the supernatural, very centered on women, happening in domestic spaces, but also happening in public, and really kind of giving women a voice in a way that just wasn't available. So it's fascinating to see this emerge at a time in history when women's roles are shifting, but it's also interesting to see how it started to shift women's roles.
Yeah. They were able to publish books via their trance channeling to the person that they were connecting with. That was, whoever they were, this famous person that is now crossed over, they would channel whole entire books and have them published.
Yeah. And I mean, what an incredible shift that is in a time when previously, I mean, there certainly were prominent women, but the opportunities for women to sort of have a public life in this way and to be listened to and to be taken seriously were very limited. And then all of a sudden, being able to do it in a trance, being able to do it in a seance, changes how people view women, and so gives their ideas a little bit more room to breathe. It's quite interesting.
Yeah. And what I find is that time period was so full of charlatans, yet it gave birth to a whole movement. And so there had to have been those who were very good at that job and legit had some kind of something happening.
Yeah.
But they get lost a little bit, I think, in history. Because of the charlatans that were much more vocal, but they did give birth to this whole, even I know that you wrote about her in the book as well too, with Mina Crandon, who was actually from Ontario originally.
Yeah. Mina Crandon's such an interesting figure. So it's this medium in Boston who is just this really interesting woman. So in the early part of the 20th century, there's a prize being offered in the United States for anyone who can find evidence of a medium or another sort of psychic figure who can prove a connection to the afterlife, who can basically prove that this is happening. And Mina Crandon is this housewife, this sort of like upper middle class doctor's wife who begins hosting seances in her house. And they're really convincing. Like they really are convincing to people. She is manifesting, I think it's her spirit of her brother who passed on. And she's sort of having people in these red light seances so that the lights are very dim, they're very red, and bells are ringing, and her brother is giving messages through her. And it seems like the voice is coming out of the air. And it was incredibly convincing to people. And so she's investigated over time by all kinds of scientists and sort of psychical research committees. The committee for a while includes Harry Houdini and a lot of other really prominent men. And it goes on for years.
Sir Arthur Conan Doyle.
Yeah, it goes like
he believed in her. He was ready to write the check.
Yeah, he really did. And it's an interesting. So later in her life, she is caught a couple of times, and it seems like she is faking certain phenomena. So she's faking at one point an ectoplasmic hand, and then it turns out to be carved animal liver. But then there are a lot of things that happen in her seances that have just never been explained or proven. And so it really leaves you with a couple of possibilities. One is that she was a genuine psychic medium producing genuine phenomena. And then the other possibility is that she's one of the most talented magicians who has ever existed and was able to fool all kinds of incredibly learned people. And I get this is one of those times I say this a lot, but either way, that's very interesting.
Right? It's still a cool story. It is cool. Like we even get excited talking about it. And my take always was too, like she would show up in see-through nighties with nothing on and need to be checked to make sure that she wasn't doing anything untowards or inappropriate, but it was still inappropriate at the same time. And was she in relationship with the people who wrote positive things about her as well too? So there's those sorts of scandals that went along with her,
and it's all very kind of murky and complex, like what was happening, who was contributing to it, what was real, what was a hoax. And we don't have any clear answers, unfortunately. And if it was a hoax, we also don't really have clear answers about her motivations, because she didn't make any money from any of this. She didn't charge for her seances. So it's it's all very like it's all very murky, and that's often where these historical pieces land, is like we know something wild was happening in the seance room. We think maybe the person involved was a fraud, but we don't really know, and we never will know. And so I love it. It's so tantalizing, like what was going on. I get so
Yeah.
fascinated by it.
And I find seances now, or how they've evolved, and if you have that understanding, or if there's transparency with it, if there's transparency in saying it is a staged seance
Yes.
event, so you go in knowing that it's like going to a haunted house. There's going to be thrills and bumps and shrieks and the adrenaline rush to it. And if it is authentic, you get to understand the history to it, maybe play around when they've bumped up, like I do when I'm hosting them, paranormal equipment. So you get to learn about it and why it works and how it works. And you may get some hits and fun, and you may not, but you get to have an experience at the same time that may be educational. So I think that hopefully, I don't know, it's not full of charlatans anymore, but I realize that there still are, but that there's a new approach to it, or more transparency with it.
Yeah, when I was researching A Ghost in the Room, I definitely did run into a few charlatans. That did happen, and it was interesting in its own right. But what I ran in more, like far more, I'd say at least 90% of the time, people are incredibly sincere across the board. And I think that tracks, right? Like people really want to know. They really want to know about ghosts. They're really fascinated. So I think what you have is this really huge community of people who are either sincere believers or sincerely just curious. And they're the ones who are going out and they are doing table tipping, and they are doing paranormal investigations, and they are running mediumship development circles, and they are all completely sincere. And then you have this like maybe 5 to 10% of charlatans who are out there and they are preying on people, and you run into them occasionally, and they're interesting in their own right, but they're not the majority of what's happening out there. You're right. I truly think today most people who are out there interested in ghosts are quite sincere about what they're doing.
Yeah. And there's a very different line between mediumship and paranormal investigation and haunted, like investigating hauntings at historical places.
Yeah.
I think that it all feels very different. The intentions are very different, and the approaches are different, and it draws different people.
I found that so fascinating, to be honest. Like there's really a spiritual side of it, sort of small s spiritual, people who are on their own path and on their own journey and sort of exploring the spiritual realm. There's like the formal religion side of it. There's sort of the big S spiritualists who are an organized religion and are, if you go to a spiritualist church, it's very churchy, for lack of a better word. It really has that feeling like it's a real community. And then on the paranormal investigation side, you get folks who are really very science minded. Like they're there with the gadgets and they don't know what ghosts are, but they want to figure it out, and they are using the tools that they have. They're using what is available to them to sort of try to investigate this very open-ended question. Like when we don't know what something is and we don't know exactly how it works or where it is or how to find it, then we kind of have to throw every tool that's available to us at it. And that's what they're doing, sort of this very kind of diligent citizen science kind of way that I find I really have a lot of respect for, to be honest. I really have respect for anyone who has a big question and goes out and tries sincerely to answer it. And that's what I found across the board.
Open-minded, not rigid.
Yeah.
I don't feel that any of this can we be rigid. Even for me in mediumship, we cannot stay like just like this and not think that there's more. I don't feel that we are allowed to know. I think we are supposed to constantly have that sense of wonder about this topic. I don't feel we're allowed to know all the answers. We're supposed to find out more once we go.
We're meant to question and meant to explore. I would agree.
Yeah. Okay. I had through that. Oh, this was the question I wanted to ask about folklore and community identity So did you find that some of those hauntings felt more like folklore and community identity rather than evidence of paranormal activity?
Yeah, definitely.
How those lines all blended, or
Yeah, there are definitely times when those lines blend. One thing I found fascinating, and it was early in my research, I was looking at a house that's here in Toronto, Mackenzie House, which is an awesome museum. It was the home of Toronto's first mayor, William Lyon Mackenzie, so the grandfather of William Lyon Mackenzie King, who was also a really interesting political figure in the Victorian era. And it's a great historic house because it's like a little narrow Victorian row house. It's very middle class. It's not the kind of house that usually gets preserved. Like, we're really lucky to have it. And it's a great museum in its own right, but it has a reputation. It is often referred to as Canada's most haunted house. And I thought, okay, that's so interesting that anyone would call anything the most haunted, first of all. Like, how do you measure haunting? Where does that come from? So I looked into it. And I did quite a bit of historical research, and I found something interesting, which is that their reputation for being haunted is a well-documented hoax. So what happened was, in the early 1960s, there was a slew of newspaper articles about this house being haunted and how this is the most haunted house in Canada. And the caretaker would go there and he'd see a woman hovering over his bed, and then she would reach out and pinch him. And there was just all of these articles. And I had heard these stories too. Like, I had heard them, I'm a Toronto museum worker. I'd heard these stories being spoken about. I'd seen news reports where people were like, is this Toronto's most haunted house? Is it Canada's most haunted house? But it came out about a year later that all of those stories were fed to the press by the Mackenzie Homestead Foundation, which was the foundation that had previously owned the house. It was going to become a museum. They wanted the museum to be popular, so they fed stories to the press. And then it got away from them. They thought, they were just going to drum up some local interest. But instead, newspapers across the country, newspapers in the US, started to pick up the story, and everyone started to call it the most haunted house. And then the CBC did, they had this Toronto show called Toronto File, and Toronto File did an episode about it, and they talked about how the house was so haunted, and they, had this, it's really, I've seen clips of this sort of like footage zooming in and out of the paintings with like sort of crashing music. It's all very spooky. And I think because of the media coverage, because of the TV coverage, people really got it in their minds that this is Canada's most haunted house. And then a newspaper article comes out that explains everything. Like, they admit to the fact that it was a hoax. It was clearly a hoax. It was never real. It was never true. And it just doesn't matter. It didn't matter. So the hoax came out. Nobody cared. A year later, the press was still reporting that the house was haunted. And then you start to see other stories as the years go by. You start to see this story about a school teacher in Toronto who loved the idea of the Mackenzie House haunting. So she takes her students there, and all the grade 8 students are there, and they're all feeling sort of spooked, and they're feeling ghosts, and it becomes part of their story, and they do a class project about it. This is in the late 60s. And then later on in the early 2000s, you've got local news stations running stories about, is this Toronto's most haunted house? And the fact that this is a hoax is well documented. It is out there. This is not new information. But it doesn't matter, because in people's minds and in the culture of Toronto, this house has become Canada's most haunted house. And so I think that's kind of significant, because it's become a way that we talk about this historical landmark. Yeah. And it's this talking point and this piece of folklore. And the reality of it at this point kind of doesn't matter, because the folklore of it is so strong and so much a part of our community here that it will probably still be called Canada's most haunted house 50, 60, 70 years from now. It's really become part of the story.
And if people are just wanting it to be so badly, they will take any little sound and it will be what they want it to be, and you can't deter them at the same time too.
You can't. I mean, I read the story about this school teacher in her class, and they talked about going there and hearing music and feeling eerie feelings. And you can't, when someone is having those feelings, even if they're coming from something that's fictional, the feelings are real. Like, they're really having them, and that really is their experience. And so it's really interesting, because it's not that the history doesn't matter anymore, but it's just that it's become folklore, and folklore takes on a life of its own.
And it's almost like a comfort blanket for some people, right? So
Yeah.
you just have to allow it to be their truth if that's what
Yeah.
it is, and just hold space for them and just try not to
Yeah. It's a comfort blanket, and also it's
crash on
fun.
them.
And I
Yeah.
think that's kind of something we can't discount about all of this, is that it's fun. Hauntings are a fun topic. Ghosts are a fun topic. And I know sometimes it's not fun and sometimes it gets scary. I understand that. But for
Yeah.
the most part, in culture, in pop culture and in our lives, if you tell someone you have a ghost story, they go, ooh, like they're excited. Ghosts
Yeah.
are fun for people. That's why we go on ghost
Yeah.
walks. That's why we go on ghost tours. And
Yeah.
I think it's okay to openly admit that. People have a lot of
Yeah.
fun with stories like this, and that is a piece of the puzzle here. That's why that's exciting. And even, when
Yeah.
I met paranormal investigators who, again, are not looking for hoaxes, they're trying to be very serious and diligent about what they do. There is still clearly a social aspect to it. People do
Yeah.
it. They have a team. They get to hang out. They eat snacks. They compare notes. They all get to talk about this thing that they love,
Yeah.
and that is community. That is fun, and that is a piece of the puzzle here.
Yeah, I agree. When there's so many things that cause stress and grief, it is that redirect, right? It is somewhere else to go into that. I was going to say non-thinking, but it's not non-thinking. It is fun. It is having a sense of curiosity and
Yeah.
moving through it. And when you say snacks, when we do paranormal investigations, that's the first thing I ask. What do you want me to bring for snacks? It's the first thing I pack. Snacks.
I have had a lot of paranormal investigators tell me this, like snacks are part of it.
So
And
true.
I think that's great. Like, I think it's, the fact that it is fun doesn't mean it's unserious. Like, those two things
Oh,
can coexist.
yes, but even in those sort of investigations and how I work, I'll ask them more than, what was your favorite holiday? Did you have a favorite meal? Did you have a favorite dessert? Did you like pie? What kind of pie did you like? Like, those are the kinds of things, because we want to know more of their story. Is there part of their story that they have not been able to share?
Yeah.
That's always my thinking in those
I
two places.
I met a great paranormal investigation team at Homer Watson House. Actually, they were tops. They were the Ontario
That's
Paranormal
who I was with
Society.
last year.
So great, so
Yeah.
fabulous. And one of the things that they sort of said to us when we were on the tour that really stuck with me was that their approach to investigating, they always make sure to treat spirits like people, because
True.
they're
Were.
people. And I thought, and that it really struck me in that moment. Like, first of all, I was impressed by how respectful and how human that is in
Yeah.
approach. But it also really kind of drove point the home to me, is that what we're essentially trying to do here is to connect with people. And there's something very sort of beautiful there. Even though
Yeah.
it's fun, even though it's spooky, even though it's a supernatural, there's something really kind of deep there about wanting to treat a spirit, wanting to treat a memory of a living person, wanting to treat the possibility of something supernatural like a human being. That
Yeah.
it really struck me.
Yeah. 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 That's who I worked with last year. And this year we'll be doing it again. They've been on the podcast a number of times. When I want to have these kinds of discussions where it's open-minded but still left brain
Yeah.
approach to the conversation, like, let's look at it from as many different perspectives as possible to have an open discussion and see where we land in it, right? And
Yeah.
so I always have them on. I'll let Jen know that you were
I
chatting
was
about them tonight.
very impressed with them. They have a fan in me.
Yeah. Oh, that's fabulous. Me too. I think they're great. Carolyn was asking, I just want to make sure that we're bringing folks in from that are here in the chat. Thank you so much for being patient, guys. Carolyn was asking, have you ever investigated a place, not just a house? For instance, that word, we got to be mindful of how the words that we're using here for YouTube and everything else. The site of the Black Donnellys near Lucan, Ontario. So much folklore, and I wonder if the abandoned field still holds energy. I drive by it and wonder.
Oh, that's
I've
such a
had
cool
an
question.
experience there. I don't know if you do.
Oh, wow. So I haven't been to that particular site, but I know that there's a paranormal investigation team in that area who sometimes do investigations. And I think they partner with a local museum that's not on that site, but is like in the neighborhood, if I remember correctly.
Yep, the
And,
Donnelly Museum.
one thing I found in my research that I thought was really interesting was that when people talk about ghosts, often they'll be going, they're not going specifically to a museum. Instead, they'll go on like either a ghost walk or what's often called a dark history tour. And these are a little bit more open-ended. These happen everywhere. They are really popular.
Dark
But
tourism is a thing.
dark tourism is a thing. And they're really interesting to me because
Yeah.
in like traditional museuming and in traditional history, if you talk about dark history, you're talking about something bad that happened in history. You would approach it with a lot of like, it's a lot of sadness. It's heavy. But if you put it in a framework of either like this sort of dark history, or especially with a little bit of a supernatural framework, if you say it's a ghost walk, it really changes people's energy toward it. People suddenly come in, but because like ghosts are involved, it doesn't feel heavy somehow. It feels fun. And this is why I kind of bring up fun a lot, because I actually think it's really important, because it allows people to sort of approach this kind of dark history, something that's really, really heavy, like we're talking about bad things happening. It allows them to approach it in a lighter way. And that has an interesting side effect. It means that, you're talking about the field here. It means that whatever space you're looking at, if you're looking at something bad that happened historically, that space in that moment kind of becomes a museum. Like you walk through it and you listen to the guide and you listen to what happened and you imagine yourself in that place, but at another time. And so I found that this kind of work can really, like, again, as the history nerd that I am, I loved that because I found that this kind of work can take any space and transform it into a place where you're really considering the history. And you are considering like the darkness of it. Like we're talking about something really dark in a lot of these places, but you're doing it with this sort of like ghosty removal that also allows you to ask, okay, well, why? Like what happened? Why did it happen? What was happening in the world at the time that caused this? And
Right.
it really, it turns a space that's not a museum kind of into a museum. And I absolutely love that.
I agree. Erin is sharing, I did a ghost walk in Ingersoll once. So fun, neat to learn the dark history in town. It was put on by the library.
That's so cool. That's so cool. There's a whole chapter on ghost walks in A Ghost in the Room, and they're really neat because they're kind of a modern phenomenon. The first ghost walks emerged in the 1970s. They started in York, in England, and they just caught on like wildfire. Like people loved the idea of walking through a space and talking about history, but also talking about ghost stories. So they come to Canada in the 90s. I was actually really lucky. I got to speak to this wonderful woman who organized one of Canada's first ghost walks and first ghost tours here in Toronto. And they have just become so popular. Like every community of mid-size or larger in Canada, as far as I could tell, offers ghost walks at some point in the year. You can take a ghost walk in the westernmost community in Canada. You can also take a ghost walk at the absolute eastern point of Canada on Signal Hill. You can take a ghost walk everywhere. And, Canada was my focus, but I know that's equally true all over the US. It's true all over Europe. They're also popular in Asia. Ghost walks are a real way for people to step in and to engage with history and to learn about the past. And that's the thing about the past, is that it's often dark.
Oh,
History is often heavy because, of course, we are looking at people who died, but we're also looking at their struggles and their pain and their trauma. And so I've truly come to believe that ghosts and the supernatural give us a lens to engage with all of that in a way that is fun, in a way that is lighter, even when the subject gets dark, and in a way that allows us to bring our openness and curiosity.
so there's a fine line, though, right?
Yeah.
Where we're not capitalizing too on the traumas, or needing to be respectful of some of those. Even with the Donnellys, if we took Donnellys as an example, they're still living family members. And so being mindful of how the stories are told, so it's still respectful of the
Yes. Very much so. And I will say, you know, as someone who spent a lot of my career working in museums, this is something we talk about a lot because it's a fine line. Like we want people to have fun. We really, really do. Believe me, we want people, and we're so excited to share the past with people. It's what we do. But we also have to be mindful that the past and the present are intertwined. So the past, although it is in the past, it is connected to what's happening now. It is often connected to living people now. It's often connected to things that are happening around us. And it's our responsibility as museum professionals to find a way to guide people through the past without ever losing sight of the fact that the past is, again, it's about real people. It's about real humans, and it has real connections to today. So yeah, we have to be sensitive to things like living family members. We have to be sensitive to things like our political environment. We have to be sensitive to the ways that the world has changed and the ways that we treat people has changed, you know, often for the better. All of those things come up a lot. And that's also true in work on the supernatural. Like it is fun. It's super fun. But we also have to be mindful that we're respectful, that we're careful, that we're thinking about living people and also about how to honor the memories of those who have passed. And so that is always an ongoing discussion in museums. It's never an easy fix, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Oh, totally. It does. And I understand that, right? And even for what I do, finding that line and how I'm delivering, you know, certain things, there needs to be that level of respect. Yeah, because we don't know how that's going to affect somebody when they're hearing those stories as well, too, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
We're being mindful of all of it. I wanted to come back, Carolyn, just to Luke, and it was just triggering a question when we talk about, when you asked Carolyn about the abandoned fields still holding energy, in looking at the homes, historic homes, and all of the artifacts that are in it, and you know how much of that still holds energy. You know that you feel different things in different rooms, our bodies reacting to different things in different spaces. And did you notice that working in museums, as you would switch out displays and new articles would come, like new artifacts would come in? And I'm thinking about Mandy. No?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, Mandy is such an interesting question. So, if you don't, so those who don't know, so Mandy is a doll who is in the collection of the Quesnel Museum in British Columbia, and she is famously purported to be or said to be a haunted doll. And what's interesting about Mandy is there's a real staff story there. So what happened was, when she was first acquired by the collection, the woman who donated her just didn't feel comfortable around her. Like she had that kind of bad feeling that you're describing. She donated her to the museum. And then the night that they were, I believe, accessioning her. And so in museum, accessioning is when you get a new artifact, and then you go through a process where you photograph it, you write down information about it, you do a lot of sort of detailed work so you know exactly what it is, where it came from, because we have to keep good records of these things. So she's being accessioned, she's being photographed, they go home for the night, and then when they come in the next morning, the photo lab where they're doing it is all torn up and things have been spread around, and that's the lore around Mandy. What's interesting about Mandy is that this doll has sort of acquired a haunted reputation, a kind of life of its own. So there was sort of a book written about eerie happenings in the area, and someone included the story of Mandy in the book. And then people started visiting the museum just to see the doll because they loved the idea of this haunted doll. And people will go in and they will report that they have a weird feeling around her, or like their camera doesn't work, or something it feels eerie to them. And, you know, when I spoke to the curator of that museum, I asked whether staff today had that feeling. And her answer was actually that there are so many interesting things in that museum that all kind of have their own interesting quality, that in a way it's kind of too bad that people are so focused on the famous one. And Mandy really did become famous. The woman who donated her and one of the former curators took her on the Montel Williams show at one point. And so there was a segment on TV, and the TV psychic Sylvia Brown sort of made up a whole story. I shouldn't say made up, but came up with an entire story about her. And so she has her own fame, right? And so I think sort of like the purported haunting of Mackenzie House, the fame brings its own energy. And so people come in with a lot of expectations about what they're going to experience around Mandy, and they find that those expectations, it comes true. And that's also the same with, there's another famous haunted doll in the United States, in Florida. It's a very similar thing. He's a very famous doll. And so people have these experiences. And
we just had his doll. We just did a segment, if not that long ago.
There you go. Yeah, Robert. So these artifacts, it's hard to tease out what people are really responding to, like in terms of what they really feel and what they're expecting to feel because of the fame. It's hard to tease that out. So in a case where like Mandy, where she's famous, but often in non-famous times and in non-famous circumstances, you'll find that people really respond strongly to certain artifacts in certain spaces and not so much to others. And I always find that really interesting, especially in a historic museum, where the artifacts that you're looking at and the spaces that you're in are likely to be really intimate. Like it's someone's house. It's not their workplace typically. If you're in a historic house museum, it's like their bedroom, their bathroom, their kitchen. It's where they ate. It's where they slept. It's where they held their loved ones. And so the space feels personal because it is. It's a home. And same with the artifacts. You might be looking at someone's wedding ring. You might be looking at someone's watch. You might be looking at the clock that they wound every day. These, whether you believe that they carry energy or not, these are sort of deeply personal artifacts. And so, of course, we have a personal reaction to them because they mean something to us as humans.
And that time period, a lot of it was the birthing, dying, viewing. Yeah. It was all of that happening in that space. So
yes, until very recently, a lot more happened in the home, in the sense of people tended to convalesce in the home, where now they would often be in a hospital. People tended to give birth in the home, where now we wouldn't necessarily do that at home. And often if someone passed, the body would be in the house on display for a while. Like our customs around death and dying have changed quite a lot in the last century. So the home was in this incredibly personal space.
Exactly. And their ways of decorating, from like embroidery samplers to the funeral, like the hair.
Yes, hair,
all of that carries energy attached to it too. But again, that personal, it's very personal.
Yeah. And, especially for Victorians, about 100, 150 years ago, death was so much more present for people than it is now. I mean, death is always part of our lives, but in that time period, the death rate was higher. People died more often. They died younger. They tended to die in the home. And so our relationship to death and mourning was quite different as a culture. And you see things like, I know what you mean about the hair jewelry. You see that a lot from that time period. I know one of the museums I worked at for a while had an entire wreath made out of human hair.
One at Ireland House.
Yeah, and, beautiful and intricate, but not something we would necessarily rush to do today. Like our ideas around handling human remains have really changed. And so
I don't know. I asked, it's funny. So I need to correct myself. There isn't a wreath at Ireland House. There's actually a piece of jewelry at Ireland House. Wow. But there is a wreath from the floral, like the flowers that they had. So it was two separate things. But people look at those and they kind of get creeped out. But I have 4 children. My oldest is 33. My baby will be 21 in a few weeks. And I have clips of their hair from when they were little. So I have their hair. Yeah. So that is no different than what the Victorians did. Like when people Absolutely. Keep, those first haircut clippings, how is that any different than keeping a clipping from someone who has passed?
Absolutely. And, you even see it, a real interest in people in this kind of thing today. There's a fantastic museum here in Toronto, Spadina Museum. If you know the city, it's right next to Casa Loma. I worked there for many years. Gorgeous 1920s mansion. And one of the things they offer during the fall season around this sort of Halloween-y time is they do hair workshops. So they will teach people historical techniques for working with hair, like Victorians did. And they use artificial hair, so people are a little more comfortable touching it, but they will teach people the skill, and they're very popular because people want to know, they're fascinated. There's this sort of like deep interest, even though it's less part of our society now, which I find really interesting.
So I'm a former hairstylist.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I love all of that. So I just love all of it. James, I see you popping in. Thank you very much. I love, James is saying, he's been busy multitasking. I've been loving the open dialogue and liveliness to the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Denise Smits, I did see you popping in. Thank you so much for being here. Late getting here, but I'm glad that you're here. I'm kind of all over the place now because my brain went somewhere. This was, if there was a question that you had when you started your research that maybe you don't have now, or that you still have now, maybe we can do it twofold. When you started this, what your intention was, did the intention change partway through? How did you?
That's a great question. When I started writing A Ghost in the Room, I really wanted to understand, like, as someone who had never had a really strong personal experience of seeing or experiencing a ghost. Like, I had experiences that I write about a little bit in the book of like sort of having that feeling of a presence in the space with me. But I had never been someone who was like, oh, I clearly saw a ghost. I saw it. I experienced it. I wanted to know, first of all, if I would have that clear experience. And I never really had one like that. I never really saw a ghost. I never saw that really, really clear, oh, this is happening experience. But I wanted to know, first of all, if I could experience something like that. But secondly, I really wanted to understand, like, what is happening when you have an experience like that? Like, what does it feel like? What are we connecting to? And whether the answer is supernatural or scientific, I really wanted to know. And in the course of researching this book, I learned a lot about the human brain. I learned a lot about theories of how our brains work and altered states and all these things like the ideomotor effect, which scientists believe is behind like Ouija board movement. I learned a lot about how our minds work. And what I learned is that when you have these experiences, people who have these experiences of feeling like they're contacting the other side or being contacted, I really came to understand how deeply convincing those experiences are. Like, it feels incredibly real. And I see now why once someone has the experience of a presence or of feeling like they're getting information from a ghost, it's a very normal thing to say, oh, I'm going to spend the rest of my life investigating this and trying to learn about this. I feel like I kind of get that on a deep level now. Like, this is fascinating. I still don't have a clear answer of like what exactly is going on, whether it's supernatural, whether it's scientific, whether it's somewhere in between. But I really understand now how compelling those experiences are and why people feel compelled to keep searching and to keep looking and to keep learning, because it is just this very profound experience that makes you see that however our brains work, however our minds work, however the world works, it's not necessarily what we just see day to day with our eyes or experience day to day with our senses. Mm-hmm. I hope that's a pretty broad answer. I hope that makes sense. But that was really,
it totally does.
Yeah,
totally does.
That was the journey that I took for sure.
Yeah, I love that. For me, in connecting to the other side, right? And have from little to now. Yeah. I love all the gadgets. I love all the paranormal gadgets. I love if I say that I'm picking up on something and I got 2 or 3 other things beeping at the same time.
Yeah.
Brilliant to me. So I love like the left brain approach to it as well too, or the more scientific approach to it, because I don't understand how or why this is what it is either. And I would love to know more. Why?
Yeah. And how. I think also another thing that changed for me is my understanding of the community that's engaged in this kind of a thing. Like, when I came in, as someone who was not really into the paranormal, as someone who was really more of a museum person, I had this idea, like, are people who are into ghosts, are they, is this, I don't know how to say this, like, is it silly? Is this weird? Is this an odd group of people? And the answer is, like, no, these are the most normal people I've ever met in my life. These are truly, completely normal, intelligent, focused people from every walk of life who are just drawn together by their own experiences, which, like I say, are incredibly compelling, and by their own deep curiosity. So, like, it really changed my perception of who is doing this. And the answer is every kind of person you could imagine is doing this, because we all have the same fundamental questions about life and death.
And I hope as that people stay open-minded on that journey as well too, and not be so rigid, you know, that there's only one way. There's going to always be a new way to investigate, or a new way to ask the questions, a new way, a new piece of equipment, a new study that's just come out. There's always going to be something new to take us even further, and to be open-minded to that, right? Not stay rigid. So yes. I think it says a lot about us. Oh, and I wanted to mention too, when I got to that point where you were talking about being part of the mediumship circle and you just thought you were going to give her a go, I was like, you go, girl. I was like, out loud as I'm reading, you go, girl.
Thank you.
I went to the spiritualist church and I didn't even do that.
Thank you. You know, it was an interesting experience, because I went to that mediumship development circle, and I had just kind of been intending to just sort of watch, and then, but they were really clear in the process that, like, this was a place to learn, this was a place to practice, and in this sort of mediumship circle that we have set, they were very clear with us, like, whatever you believe, whatever you feel personally, if you have images in your mind, you should take it as a message, and you should give it. And so I was glad I did. And I see, we're beings of energy connected to energy. That's lovely. Right. But it was a really interesting experience, because, you know, I really don't know, as someone who's still very much questioning, like, whether it was a message from a spirit or whether it was simply something that I saw in the person I was speaking to. I don't know the answer to that. But it was really interesting to me that even me, as someone who was not coming in from a spiritualist background, as someone who does not consider myself a medium, that in that circle, I still felt compelled to participate. And it really drove home for me how much of a community experience that is, and how much of a communal experience that is.
And again, the part that I loved, one of the things of many things that I loved about the book, was your willingness to just jump in. You do it again when you're holding the table, when you're doing, and, you know, so it happened again in this moment. And so that, in my left brain thinking, or in the way that I question everything, because I have 1,000 questions about everything all the time, is it the amount of energy of all of you together, and you just went into that non-thinking space and allowed it to happen? So whether it was the communal energy all together, yours, was it spirit, was it all of it? And I feel like I don't need to know the answer. I just love the wonderment of it, and I'm okay to have that experience again. That's how I would.
Wonderment is a really good word for it. Like, I really pushed, when we were naming the book, I really pushed to call it Supernatural Adventures in Historic Houses, because a big part of my research process was that I didn't just want to read about ghosts. I didn't just want to look at the history. I wanted to go out and experience it, but I didn't just want to be a fly on the wall. Like, I wanted to experience it.
I wanted to immerse yourself.
Yeah, I wanted to understand, why is this important to people? And what does it feel like? Like, why are people so compelled by this? And I was really lucky in the sense that, like, the paranormal community is incredibly welcoming. People were just always happy to have me there, happy to answer questions, happy to participate. It's a cool group of people. And so I really got to get hands-on. And I think part of that is because I am a museum person. And the way we approach things is very hands-on. Like if you come to a historic house museum, you're in the room and you're eating the cookie and you're doing the thing. Like we tend to believe in a really hands-on approach to learning. But also I wanted to have that because these are living questions. These are living practices. And so I wanted to live them too. So yeah, I had a couple of very interesting years where I tried everything, and I did mediumship, and I did table tipping, as you've mentioned, and automatic writing workshops, and everything I could find to get my hands on, often dragging people like my sister and my friends along. And it really was a series of adventures, which is the part I loved about writing it, like was this really kind of experiential quality.
So my question to that then, in dragging along the friends and family, which is what we do, in that moment, how different was their experience in that same moment compared to yours?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I found with my friends, as you find with any group of people, a real sort of spectrum of belief. So there's me, who is science-minded and on the skeptical end, but really trying to be open to the idea that I don't know what's going on here and it could be anything. I have friends who were very, very skeptical and dismissive of the experience. And then I also had friends who really tended to either believe in whole or in part, to really believe that spirit communication was happening, to be people who would go to mediums and go to psychics, who were very immersed in that world, friends who were really big believers in ghosts. And so to get to see this through their eyes really showed me how personal these beliefs are, and how you can be skeptical about one thing, but very much a believer in another. And what was interesting was, no matter what people believed, they would have these experiences and find them very compelling. Like if we went on a ghost walk, for example, people would be fascinated by the ghosts and fascinated by the stories, no matter what they believed. If we went on a paranormal investigation, people would come out saying, wow, even though I don't necessarily believe we saw a ghost, I could see how fascinating and eerie that room was, and how we all sort of felt something special in it. So that was interesting. At one point, there's a chapter in the book on Ouija boards, and I got a group of friends together, and we did some experimenting at a games night. We also played board games, but we experimented, and I made a special sort of Ouija board that allowed us to test it with blindfolds and without, to kind of see what was happening. And it was really interesting because we had some friends in that group who, like a lot of people, had a lot of fear around Ouija boards. And so they were there and diligently taking notes, but they wouldn't touch it.
Was it cultural or religious?
Both. So it's often people who come from some religious backgrounds, are specifically against Ouija boards. Like the Catholic Church has sort of came out very strongly against them in the 1920s. And so people who are Catholic often feel more hesitant around them, but a lot of it is also cultural. The Exorcist came out about 50 years ago in the early 70s. And man, that movie has had a big impact on people, because earlier, if you look at the history of Ouija boards in the 1920s, people were not really scared of them. They really weren't. People treated Ouija boards the way we treat astrology now, which is something that's technically supernatural, but it's kind of a fun thing, and you do it with friends, and it's got this lightheartedness to it. And they were popular on dates. There's some great, there's a wonderful painting of people using one on a date. It's really cute.
There's a Norman Rockwell painting.
Yeah. That's the one. It's this super cute painting. There were pop songs about Ouija boards because they were really popular, but they were fun. They were a fun thing. And then The Exorcist comes out, and they're scary in the movie. And so a lot of people have this idea that I think is 90% from the movie, that Ouija boards are terrifying. And that is so pervasive. That is more so than ghosts, more so than anything else. That was the thing I encountered that people felt the most fear around, which I found quite interesting.
So I didn't do at the top of the hour, halfway through my station ID. So I'm going to just do that really quickly. We're going to pop that in right now. So David Wilson, thank you so much. Marianne Sutton. So Thunder Bay lady right here, Marianne Sutton. Yeah. So another Thunder Bay. Jen Schneider, tooth necklace isn't weird then? No, it is It is not, and especially coming from you. So sorry, my friend. When we were talking about collecting hair and hair necklaces, and she said, "So tooth necklaces isn't weird." I just want to make sure that we carry fast. We are beings of energy, connected to energy. Thank you so much for chiming in on that. So everyone, if you are just chiming in now, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate all of you. You are listening to Spirit Switchboard, and I'm your host, Carrie Lynn Shellhorn, and you are listening to us live on the United Public Radio Network and the UFO Paranormal Radio Network, 105.3 in the Gulf Coast and 107.7 FM in New Orleans. If you are interested in finding out more about what UPRAN has to offer, you can head to uprntalkradio.com and find out more about the hosts and shows. There is something for everyone. It is not all high strangeness. Today's guest is Ann McDougall, who is the author of A Ghost in the Room, Supernatural Adventures in Historic Places. Most of the places that you investigated were within Canada, but there was one in the UK, correct? There was one.
Yes. So I mostly stayed within Canada just because I am within Canada. But this is
Canada's got a rich history, even though we're a young country.
Yes, we have a really rich paranormal history. So I never ran out of topics. But the truth is, this is a topic that spans the world. So there's lots of fascinating paranormal history in the US. There's, of course, tons in the UK. I wrote a little bit about Arthur Findlay College in the UK, which is this, it's like Hogwarts for mediums. It's this sort of mediumship school that's in a mansion in the English countryside and runs programs all throughout the year. Their origin is in the spiritualist church and the spiritualist faith. And one of the things I found so interesting about spiritualism as a religion was it has this ongoing focus on education. Like the idea, the soul persists and the soul can always improve and we can all develop. And so education is incredibly important. So there are workshops running constantly. There are people learning, people investigating. And as someone who loves to learn, as a museum person, I resonate with that so much. I think it's really neat.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, for people who, well, I guess it's not, I guess I originally, when I wrote this question, now I'm rethinking how I wrote it. So originally when I wrote the question, it was for people who love haunted history, what do you hope they take away from your book? But it's more than just haunted history. It is curiosity to places even, or getting out within their community and finding out more too, right?
Yeah.
So, but what I guess would be your hope that people take away from
I hope two things. One is that I really do hope people get out into their local museums, because every community has some kind of local museum, and they are almost always run by the most interesting, passionate people that you've ever met. And every community is a treasure trove of stories. So true. Whether it's from a paranormal angle or not, I would encourage anybody, find out what the museums are in your area and check them out, because there's fascinating stuff everywhere. Yeah, and then and then the bigger thing I would take away from this experience is, and this book is, whether you are someone who is a firm believer in the paranormal or someone who's really, really skeptical, I would invite anybody to imagine the other side. So imagine the other point of view. So if you are a believer, I think it's really, really interesting to spend some time thinking about the science of the supernatural. Yes. Why do we believe what we believe? Like, if we put the paranormal aside, why do we have experiences like this? Why do our brains do this? Because there is so much we know about things like altered states of consciousness and the ideomotor effect. And I think that digging into that can only improve your understanding of yourself and the world in a way that would ultimately complement your beliefs. So I invite anybody to really dig into the science of it. And by the same token, for anyone out there who is skeptical, as I tend to be, to really take the time to imagine the believing side of it. Imagine a world where, if ghosts exist, where if spirits can communicate, what would that mean for us as people? What would that mean? And why would this be so compelling for those who believe? Because again, you'll get really interesting answers by going down those avenues with an open mind and a sort of open-heartedness. And I think it can reveal a lot about what it means to be a human in the world, if that makes any sense.
For sure it does. You're giving people permission to ask questions and have a sense of play at the same time.
Yeah, I think openness and curiosity is really one of the best ways that we can approach big questions in life. And I think they can lead us to some very real and grounded answers.
And yeah, every community has, and if you're not sure where to start, you look up your historical societies, because they will point you in the right place.
Check them out. Local historians are the best. They know so much and they're so interesting, and every community has this real history, and this is the stuff like you don't find online. In a way, this is the stuff you don't find. You can't ask ChatGPT this. You can only get personal stories from real people and real artifacts. So dig in, get out there. History is everywhere. It's all around us.
I love museums too. She's saying she loves that. She's just
thank you.
And the historians take the time to do the research and asking family members of former important people, or who's got a story, and digging into it, and can they verify it? Like they dig into those stories. As we were chatting, I've got all of this stuff kind of rolling in my head. There's a venue here in Guelph called the Albion.
Oh,
yeah. When we're talking about the folklore and stuff like that, there's folklore that oh my gosh, now I'm having famous mobster.
Oh wow.
Rum runner.
Al Capone?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There's all these like folklore stories that Al Capone was like there and had this girlfriend there, and it's not true.
Oh, really? It's so interesting.
But we all want it to be true.
It's one of those things, right? Like folklore takes on a life of its own. And, historians are great because they can help you sift through the difference between like what's folklore and what is real solid history. And that is worth doing. It's good to know what's real and what isn't. But also, folklore does take on a life of its own in a fascinating way. Like I love how we use our communities as a way to sort of create these communal stories. I think that's a very interesting tendency that humans have.
Yeah. Mary Ann, thank you for sharing. She's saying, I've always been afraid of death, but now with everything I've been learning, I'm not afraid anymore. Thank you for sharing. Part of your journey that you share very vulnerably in the story is your personal journey with losing your mom.
Yeah.
And so I know that that's part of it, right? We want to know what's on the other side. Can they connect with us? Can they tell us they're okay? Can they tell us what they're doing on the other side? It's a very big part. And you very delicately walk through very many lines, from the skeptic side to the believer side to the want to believe. And you did a brilliant job with your book. I think with your intention, it really comes through. And as someone who works as a medium, I appreciate so deeply how you approach the book and keeping it in that space.
Thank you.
Not one way or the other.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. What you're referring to there is, after my mom passed, I had what I've since learned is a very common experience, which is that feeling in sort of the days after, the nights after she died, was that feeling of her presence in the room with me. And, for me, for someone who's more skeptical, I don't know if I would necessarily describe that as a ghost experience. I know a lot of people would. But what I learned is that kind of experience is incredibly common. Like we're talking about half the population will have an experience like that after losing a loved one, whether you feel their presence, whether you actually see them, whether you spot their face in a crowd, even though they can't be there. And that experience was sort of like the heart of why I wanted to not just tell ghost stories, but to really investigate what is happening and why this is important to us. Because you can have experiences like that no matter what you believe. Whether you are skeptical, whether you are a believer,
that's right.
You are very likely to have an experience of that type in your life. And that is incredibly meaningful. Like the experience was very meaningful for me. It's very meaningful for almost everyone who has one. And I think it's not in any way trivial or silly to ask, what is happening?
Yeah.
And, one thing I say a lot is the question for me is never, are ghosts real? The question is, are ghosts in the world, or are they in our minds? Are they part of how we process and think and come to terms with death? And I definitely don't have a definitive answer. I don't think anyone does.
No.
But either way, this is an essential question about how the world works and about how we work within the world. And I think it is so worth pursuing and so worth investigating. Like, ghosts may be fun, as I say often, but they're not trivial. They're a big part of human society and maybe a deeper part of our meaning for what we're doing here. So I think
I
they're
agree.
so worth looking into.
Yeah. And that high intention, low attachment, be open-minded to all of it, right? Like, even though I'm this way, I would still need to understand why is this happening. So I still left brain as much too, right? Everyone's learned to not send me photos because I'll tell you, I don't see it. Is this? Yeah. I'm really sorry. If you really need it to be this, don't send it to me because I don't get it. Okay. Heidi, I just wanted to put up all of these. Well, David, I'm getting down here. So Heidi said a founder of this town was a preservationist and started Boulder County Preservation Society. So not only did they plan to build it, they planned to preserve it.
That's so cool.
David is sharing in over 25 years of ghost hunting, I find most of the history being told in school is wrong. Doing the paranormal is a great way to really find the truth of the places you are ghost hunting in, if people are doing the research to it. Some people just run with the folklore and don't dig into the actual history. We have found that on just a lot of chatting with people and finding things and putting all the parts together. That's the fun of doing this. The research part of asking more questions to dig deeper, right? And
engaging, like getting out there, being in the place and doing it and talking to people. I have so much respect for that approach to any kind of learning.
So Marianne, I'm not sure if you're asking both of us, but we will, there we go. Do you believe in interdimensions?
Oh, that's a cool question. I mean, what I've found is that there is so much beyond the topic of just ghosts in terms of the paranormal world. Like, actually, really, when I was writing this book, I really had to rein myself in because often, we'd start talking about ghosts and then we would end up on sort of these big questions like interdimensions or plant medicine or this sort of like wide world of paranormal phenomena. I don't have a clear answer on interdimensions. It's not something I know a ton about, but man, there's so much out there that people are trying to figure out and engage with, and so many theories that they're bringing. I find that so interesting.
Yeah. So I'm not, I believe that there's more, but I don't claim to understand any of it. And if you've ever listened to Mike Ricksecker talk about anything timey-wimey and wibbly-wobbly, my eyeballs go across because I'm like trying to understand any quantum physics things that he's trying to explain. Like, he was in Thunder Bay last year too, talking about Shadow Man, but it was all interdimensional and timey-wimey. And
oh, cool.
Yeah, I was like, oh, I don't know if it can be given to me in like a rebus form. I might be able to stay present to roll with that conversation. But what I like about it too is having the conversation. Mm-hmm. Even though I don't fully understand, listening to somebody who has this experience, it's fun to get enthusiastic in somebody else's passions.
100%. And I really love the passion that people bring to this topic. Like, it is so personal for people that they really do bring their passion and excitement. And that I love to see.
And then we learn. So we learn. I didn't understand how paranormal equipment worked, and it took a long time to meet people who were open-minded to talk to a medium and include a medium and then teach me. I want to understand like what can affect the equipment and give us the false positives, and why does it work the way that it works, so that I can teach it properly when we're in those places as well too. Like, I think it's important to have that community so we can learn and share more. So I love the way that you approached this, is with that same intention, right? Teach me, and I'm here to learn and understand from all different perspectives.
Yeah, thank you. And one of my favorite parts of writing this book was just getting to talk to such a range of people. And
Yeah.
people were incredibly welcoming and incredibly candid with me, which I really appreciated. Like, people were really willing to share their stories. I tried in the course of the book to be really open with people about what I was writing. I would often show them a passage just because I didn't want anyone to feel like I was ever going to make fun of them or show them in a bad light, because that was never my intention. Like, I wanted to know, whatever you are doing, I want to know why and I want to know how. And people were just incredibly generous about sort of bringing their perspective and their stories and their details. And that's one of the things that made this book really rich, is I got to interview and talk to a wide range of people on the paranormal end, people on the spiritual end, academics who are studying this stuff.
Yeah.
It's such a cool experience.
Yeah. And I find I've been quite transparent about it, and having different people on, especially academics, where my Chihuahua brain kicks in and I'm like, oh, I'm not going to be smart enough to have this interview or this conversation. But we are talking about the same thing, just using different language. And that's what I've learned from doing Spirit Switchboard. It's the same passion, coming to the same concepts and ideas, but just different language.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, I really hope in the sort of more sciencey side of this book, because there's a lot of science in this book.
There is a lot.
I really hope that what people will take away is that, like, there's no need to be intimidated by anything scientific. Like, anybody can dig in and read studies and read the history. Like, the thing about science is that it's testable, it's provable. This is the stuff where you can dig in and see why exactly people came to the conclusions that they did. And I think for anyone interested in the paranormal, digging into the science is a great way to go, because you will learn so many interesting things. I personally was fascinated. I learned a ton about the human brain, a lot about our bodies, a lot about the energy and brainwaves and all kinds of fascinating things. And again, it's hard science, but like, it's not inaccessible. Like, really, there are people out there who are very good at explaining this, and it really opens the world in a new way. So any paranormal enthusiast, I encourage you, get into the science, get into the physics. It's really fascinating.
Yeah. The parapsychology of it too. Like, it's all of it. I know when I do the paranormal dining with the dead, so at those locations, so like at the Coach and Lantern in Ancaster, I don't know if you've heard about it, but again, it's a museum in itself, this restaurant, the building that it's in.
Cool.
But when I bring all the paranormal equipment, I'm telling people, this isn't data research. This isn't actual research. This is just to get you fired up, to ask the questions and to learn a little bit more, because there's no controls in the environment that we're currently in, right? But to start teaching them so that, they see a different perspective than what they see on TV, because what they see on TV that's the entertainment side.
Yeah, that's it. Absolutely. Like, there's a whole world of sort of paranormal entertainment, which can be very entertaining, but it's for TV. And then you're right. A seance experience it's not an experiment. Like, it's not a controlled environment. It's not a lab. So you have to go in knowing that whatever you experience is going to be subjective, because we all have a subjective experience. We all have our own biases. We want to see things sometimes, or we create a story together, which doesn't mean your experience isn't valid and interesting and a really interesting data point. But also know there's also a whole world of scientists who are looking into this phenomena and doing experiments, and their hard data is also fascinating. So there's so much to dig into here.
And to not discount your personal experience, because that's what we're hoping to have to begin with, is a personal experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just because nobody else is having the same personal experience doesn't mean it isn't your truth.
Absolutely. And I would say, document those experiences, write them down, because our memories can shift over time. Our understanding of the details can shift over time. And what I love is there are a lot of people who really bring a lot of sort of rigor to this, and they really try to be scientific and try to learn and figure out what's going on. And I think that's really cool.
Yeah, it's brilliant. So www.AnnMcDougall, to Alice folks, Ann McDougall, and Ann with no E.
Yes.
Just making sure that we're spelling it correctly. So AnnMcDougall.com. You can find out more about Ann. And there's links to the book through the website as well too.
Yes, there are.
When I was promoting it, I was trying to not do the Amazon route, so I linked it right to the publisher page.
That is always, it's a small Canadian publisher, so they always appreciate
Yes.
that. But if you are looking for the book, first of all, thank you. But you can find it in Canada on Indigo. In the US, you can find it at Barnes & Noble. You can find it in bookstores in the UK as well. And there's a good chance your local library might have it. And if they don't, you can always request it. So it is a widely available book, A Ghost in the Room. And if you do read it, I really hope you enjoy it.
Yeah, thank you so much for being on, Anne. I appreciate it. And if there's ever a round 2, then I would love to have you back on again to chat more about it.
Thank you so much. This has been such a fun conversation, such a pleasure. And thank you to everybody who's joined us. This has been really fun.
I think we should bring our sisters on and then do a round table with the sisters.
Oh, my sister would love to talk to you about cryptids in the backyard, I'm sure.
My sister too. I think it would be a lot of fun. My sister is a fan favorite. My sister is the funny one. So like when she comes, because she is way more like resistant to all of this, right? So
that's great. That's the dynamic you want. That's so fun.
It is a lot of fun. So next week, folks, Michelle DeRoche, our network manager and host of The Outer Realm, will be coming on to talk about sleep paralysis, and we are talking about Shadow Man in connection with sleep paralysis. So we get to do the left brain scientific and the woo factor again next week, folks. So that's what we will be talking about. Thanks everybody in the chat. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you again, Anne, for participating in the chat and agreeing to come on. And it's just been a pleasure. Thank you everybody in the chat. Thank you to the United Public Radio Network and the UFO Paranormal Radio Network, 105.3 in the Gulf Coast and 107.7 FM in New Orleans. Have a great weekend, everybody. And we'll see you back here next week, Friday at 6:10 p.m. Good night, everyone.
Bye.